So I'd like to greet you with a little greeting of St. Francis, and that is, may the Lord give you his peace. You know, I've always been devoted to Our Lady of Fatima all through my life. And this book came about through Ignatius Press when about 3 years ago, they put out a DVD. They were the distributors of a DVD called The 13th Day. It was about Fatima. I think it was very, very well done. Very simple, but got the message across. It didn't give the entire events of Fatima. It didn't have the angel that appeared to the children. Didn't have all the apparitions of Our Lady. Didn't have the follow-up in regard to when they were to, when Our Lady had said she would come back and ask for the communion of reparation, which we call the 5 First Saturdays devotion, and the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart by the Holy Father with the bishops. It doesn't have that in there. But what it does have is some of the historical events of some of the apparitions of Our Lady, including the miracle of the sun, and so on. So I worked with them on that, doing a kind of a trailer to that to explain the whole message of Fatima. And they said that there was a kind of renewed interest in Fatima, and they said to me, would you write a book for us on Fatima that would be up to date, put everything in it. My friend Tony Ryan, who works for them, said, Father, put everything in it so people can have one book, they can read the whole thing. And so that, I felt very challenged by that, and I did feel, as I wrote this book, that Our Lady wanted me to write it for her. It wasn't my initiative. They asked me to do it, and it had its moments of struggle to finally get it done. But it tells the story that is so very, very important in our times. Our Lady coming to Fatima. Just let me preface it with a remark that Pope John Paul II, even before he became Holy Father, around 1976, when we had the Eucharistic Congress in Philadelphia that year, he made a statement, and he said this. He said, the Catholic Church is involved in the greatest spiritual struggle of her whole 2,000-year history. And what's at stake is not one nation or one aspect of the faith, but the entire Christian culture that has built up for 2,000 years. And he said most Catholics are not aware that this spiritual struggle is going on. And at that time, he said that. And he said, but it's been allowed by providence. He never elaborated on that. I wish he had said a little bit more about that at that time. I'm just trying to fix this here, Mike. And it's true. We are in the greatest spiritual struggle of the Church's 2,000-year history. And you can see very clearly now the culture, Christian culture at stake. What are the attacks being made by secularism? It's an attack on the family, which is the key. The sanctity of life, which is the key foundation of any Catholic culture. In other words, that each person is recognized as having a dignity, sacred dignity for the person. And that's been attacked by abortion, euthanasia, and now, so many other ways. Then the family as God created the family, Adam and Eve and, their children. In every Christian family, one man, one woman, now being attacked, as we see, not only by same-sex marriages, but also people just living together without the benefit of marriage. And then the freedom. Now we see this with the mandates, which I call the dictates, because a mandate is something that a person has authority to command, or has been given authority. People, vote for something. This is a mandate from the people. No one has authority over your conscience. Absolutely no one. God alone is the only one who has authority to command your conscience. So it's not a mandate, it's a dictate which is given by dictators who don't care about your conscience. Do you see? And that's why this struggle, people don't realize, but this issue is so important that if it slides by, we open our way up to a dictatorship. And are they going to force our hospitals to do abortions? Are they going to force our Catholic schools to teach homosexual, same-sex marriages? Where do you stop? If you can violate your conscience on this matter, you can violate it on any. That's why the struggle is immense. She told us things like this were going to happen. We have to listen to her message. Why? Because she told us what the evil would be. And she told us what the solution would be. We're not doing the solution yet in sufficient numbers. She said, when enough people do what I ask, then the triumph of my Immaculate Heart will come. And I feel that it's so important for us to do this. When I wrote this book, there were 4 things basically that I wanted to deal with. Number 1 was to show Mary's role in salvation history, how it is a role that is involved in the continuous struggle between good and evil, right? Where's the first time we hear about Our Lady in Scripture? All the way back in Genesis, right? Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I will put enmity, God said to the serpent, the devil, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring, his followers, and hers, her divine son, and his followers. And the Greek text reads, and you shall strike at his heel, and he shall crush your head. When St. Jerome translated that from the Greek into the Latin, he changed it. He said, and you shall strike at her heel, and she shall crush your head. So Mary is involved in this constant struggle from the very opening pages of Scripture. See, she's our mother, but she is also the one involved immensely in this struggle. Go to the last book of Scripture, right? Book of Revelation. What do you read? St. John tells us the heavens opened and a great sign appeared. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. One of the brothers in my community told me once, he said, Father, we got a 12-star general leading us. They don't come that big in the U.S. Army. Huh? So a woman with the crown, clothed with the sun, crowned, standing on the moon, and the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. And that's Our Lady. And what appears immediately after that? The red dragon. And the dragon tries to destroy the woman with her child. So Mary is involved deeply in this struggle, and we have to go to her. 2 saints helped to prepare us for the struggle. And that one, first one was St. Louis de Montfort. When he said in his beautiful book on true devotion, which inspired, you remember, Pope John Paul II. That's where he got his big M, and totus tuus, which means all yours, Mary. He got it from St. Louis de Montfort. See? And in that book, St. Louis de Montfort says, in the centuries to follow, the Blessed Mother will prepare her sons and daughters for a great struggle. And that's what she did at Fatima. Places like Lourdes. Lourdes is a place to go, and the Spirit of Our Lady is very, very powerful there. Fatima, I don't look at it only as a place to go, it's a message. But no message of Our Blessed Lady has ever received as much attention from the Church, from the Holy Fathers, as did Fatima. Pope Paul VI went there as Pope once. John Paul went there 3 times, and Pope Benedict has been there already once. Okay? No other place of apparition has ever received quite the same focus. And so the Blessed Mother, she came there to prepare her children for this great spiritual struggle. The other saint who was very significant was Saint John Bosco. You remember his famous dream when he saw the church as a great wooden ship? It was in very stormy waters, and it had all little boats with the faithful all around it. But surrounding the ship of the church, was an enemy fleet that had cannons and battering rams and everything that were intent on destroying the ship of the church. And all of a sudden, divine providence came to the rescue. Remember, he saw these 2 columns come out of the sea. The higher column had the Blessed Sacrament. The lower column had the Blessed Mother. And the Pope who was guiding the ship realized, if only I could bring the ship between these 2 columns, I could anchor it safely. So he begins to go in that direction. If any of the cannonballs or any of the battering rams did any harm to the ship of the church, the breezes from those 2 columns healed it. Till finally, the Pope was ready to bring the ship between the 2 columns, and he was shot. He was shot, but he didn't die. People picked him up. He brings it closer, and he was shot the second time, and he died. Okay? They believed that was John Paul II, although he didn't die by shooting. His life didn't end that way, but he was the Pope who was shot. And remember, he was about to bring the ship between the 2 columns. And remember, after the year 2000, Pope John Paul gave us 2 beautiful documents. one on the Blessed Mother and the Rosary. Remember that? In the year 2002, in which he encouraged us to go back to saying the Rosary. He called it a prayer of peace, a prayer that brings families together. Remember Father Peyton, who's up for canonization now, Patrick Peyton, the family that prays together, stays together. He used to say also that a world at prayer is a world at peace. And so Pope John Paul gave us the document on the Rosary of Our Lady, which is prominent in the Fatima message, okay? It's the only thing our Blessed Lady asked in all 6 of her apparitions to the children in the cova. Pray the Rosary every day. Are you praying your Rosary every day? It's such a beautiful prayer. Padre Pio used to say, is there any prayer more beautiful than the prayer Our Lady herself gave us, than the Rosary? He said, always pray the Rosary. And then he said, you know, Blessed Mother gave us the Rosary, but the devil's always trying to take it away. So don't let him take your Rosary away from you. When he was old, he was getting dressed one day, and he had the help of some of the brothers to help him. And he turned to one of the brothers and he said, brother, get me my weapon. And the brother was startled. He said, Padre Pio, you don't have a weapon. My Rosary, see, to do good and oppose evil. And I have to tell a little story. One time, this man was sort of bragging a little bit. He said to Padre Pio, he said, you know, Padre Pio, I said 5 rosaries today. Padre Pio said, that's very good. He said, I said about 35. And the man said, 35 rosaries? You've been busy all day long. When did you have time to say 35 rosaries? He said, well, you do one thing at a time. I do 3 or 4 things at a time. I guess if you could appear on bilocation all over the world, you could do 3 or 4 things at the same time, you know? So he was a man of the Rosary, huh? And one of the rosaries I always carry with me was from Mother Teresa. She was another great saint of our time, and certainly dedicated to the Rosary, huh? So we have, you know, so Our Lady then, you know, Pope John Paul, I was saying, he gave us, you know, those 2 documents, because he gave us the Eucharist on the year he died, huh? And so he wanted to focus on those 2 things. Now, when the Lord took him, Pope Benedict has been continued to promote this message. When he was in Fatima on for May 13th, year 2010, it was the 10th anniversary of the beatification of little Jacinta and Francisco. When he was there, he made the statement. He said, anyone who thinks that the prophetic message of Fatima is over is clearly mistaken. And he said, we can hope that within the next 7 years, we will see the fulfillment of Our Lady's promise, the triumph of her Immaculate Heart. Okay? So it's very important. This Holy Father is very dedicated to Fatima. He said, learn the message of Fatima, live the message of Fatima, and spread the message of Fatima. Okay? And by the way, when he was there in 2010, at his Mass at the Cova, there were 3 rows of Russian people, and they held up a big sign, Mary, thank you for what you are doing for our nation. So they know the consecration took hold. It did. I will explain very clearly, carefully in the book. Okay? Now, let me go to the second thing I want to say. So I wanted to show Mary's role in salvation history. The second thing is what was happening in the world at the time. Okay? There were many, many secular governments coming to power. You know, they were mostly Masons. For example, even the government in Portugal was a Masonic government. Okay? And the president there in 1914 said, in 2 generations, there won't be any traces of Catholicism left in Portugal. Mother Teresa used to say, you want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. I bet you God had a big laugh over that. He sent his own mother there, right, to spread that message of Fatima. And so there were many, many terrible things happening, governments, and of course, later on, 1917, Our Lady herself predicted the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia. Now, it was a very difficult time. As you know, World War I began in 1914, and the Pope at the time was Pope Benedict the 15th. And he was a very good man. He tried diplomatically to bring the warring factors together, but there was such hatred of nation against nation that it was impossible to make any headway. So finally in 1917, in May 1917, he said, we have to turn to Our Lady. She can obtain this grace of peace for us. He began a novena, and on the 8th day of the novena, May 13, 1917, the Blessed Mother made her first apparition at Fatima. She appeared to the 3 little children. Remember, Lucia de Santos, she was 10. Her little cousin, Francisco, he was 9, Francisco Marto. And little Francisco's little sister, Jacinta Marto, was only 7. Now, I want to go back for a moment before I get into the apparitions of Our Lady to remind you that God prepared the way for Our Lady to come by sending an angel 3 times to the children. Okay? He called himself the Angel of Peace, the Angel of Portugal. And he appeared to the children once in the spring of 1916, then in the summer, and then in the fall. In 1916, in the spring, he appeared to them and he taught the children. He wanted to prepare them. He said God had plans for them. And he wanted to teach them to be generous in making sacrifices. So he taught them a little prayer that we call the pardon prayer. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. And I beg pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you. And so he left the children with that prayer. Okay? 6 months later, he appeared again, and the children were having games. They were playing some games and everything. And he said, what are you doing? Why aren't you praying? He said, God has a special mission for all of you. And that's when they took it very seriously. He encouraged them to say the prayer of, that prayer I just mentioned. It's called the pardon prayer. And they began to say it zealously. And he even told them to make sacrifices. And Lucia said, well, what's a sacrifice? And the angel said, you can make a sacrifice of anything you do and offer it to God. See, for peace in the world and the conversion of sinners. They go together. There will be peace when enough people have turned away from their sins. Our Lady told little Jacinta, war is the punishment for sin. I think we could see that very clearly. And that's why if we don't turn the abortion and this homosexual stuff around, there's going to be a punishment for our sins. What we don't want to wait for is a chastisement, okay? It won't be good, it won't be nice. It'll be very terrible. So we need to pray. And we need to offer sacrifices. Now, the angel came the 3rd time in the fall, okay? And this was very special because the angel came with the Eucharist. Maybe you've seen pictures of it. You see the angel, the host above the chalice, and the host were dripping the precious blood into the chalice. And you remember, the angel came around, and with the 3 little children, they bowed to the ground, bowing their heads to the ground, just like the Muslims pray. And this is the prayer they said. Just to get it correct, I have a little appendix here with the prayers at the end, the Fatima prayers. O most holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, I adore you profoundly. I offer you the most precious body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, present in all the tabernacles of the world, in reparation for the outrages, sacrileges, and indifference by which he is offended. By the infinite merits of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I beg the conversion of poor sinners. So the angel brought the Eucharist. By the way, he gave communion. Lucia had already received her first communion, so she received the host. The other 2 little ones didn't receive the first communion, so they drank from the chalice. He gave them the precious blood. And you notice, this is where, in that, going back to that dream of St. John Bosco, this is where the Eucharist comes in. See? So Fatima connects the Eucharist through the angel apparition, who brought the Eucharist to the children. And the prayer, you notice, reparation. What is reparation? See, when people sin, and basically, especially with hatred of God, they tell God, I hate you. Well, who's going to make up for that? Who's going to tell God, I love you, to make up for that hatred? See? Who's going to make up for the sins that offend Almighty God? Someone has to do this. And that's what Our Lady came to ask for. Reparation for sins intercession for sinners, for their conversion, or they would be lost. In fact, she said in the October apparition, she said, and Lucia said, when she said this, sadness came over her. But she said, pray a great deal, because many souls are lost from God. And offer sacrifices, she said, because many souls are lost from God, because there is no one to pray and offer sacrifices for sinners. They're being lost, in other words. And this is why she came to save her children. Okay? So the Eucharist was there through the angel, and the little children prayed that. And by the way, if you are in the practice of making a holy hour or visiting the Blessed Sacrament, the pardon prayer and this angel, it's called the angel's prayer, are beautiful prayers to pray before the Blessed Sacrament, or anywhere that you are, but especially if you pray a holy hour or pray before the Blessed Sacrament. Now, that set the stage, and the children became very generous in making sacrifices. Well, finally, Our Lady came. Remember, the novena was going on, the 8th day of the novena. It was a Sunday. The children had already gone to Mass, and they took their flocks of sheep. Lucia was the youngest in her family. Francisco and Jacinta were the youngest in their family, and it was always the role of the youngest children to take care of the sheep. So they would bring them out to graze in the cova, which was owned by Lucia's father and mother, and they would bring them there to the cova to graze the sheep. In the winter, they stayed a little bit closer. The cova was about 2 miles from their house. And so they were watching the sheep, and all of a sudden they saw with a stroke of lightning, they thought it was going to rain, and Our Lady appeared. And they asked her, who are you? Where are you from, rather? They asked her, where are you from? She said, I'm from heaven. And they kept calling her the beautiful lady from heaven. Okay? And the 3 children, little Lucia was always concerned about this. She said, are we going to go to heaven? She said, yes, each one of you. Okay? So she asked them, are you willing to accept suffering from God for the salvation of souls and the peace of the world? And they said, yes. 10 years old, 9 years old, and 7 years old. Yes, we will accept it. See, they had become very generous with their sacrifices and their prayers. So Our Lady said, you will have them to suffer. Okay? The one who suffered the most was Lucia. You know why? They had agreed not to say anything about this apparition, but poor little Jacinta, only 7 years old, she couldn't hold it in. She had to blurt it out to her mother, Mom, we saw this beautiful lady in the cova. See? And now the Martos, Marta, the father of the Martos, he believed immediately. You know why? He said, if my son, Francisco, said he saw a beautiful lady in the cova, he saw her because he never lies. See? So the Martos believed, but Lucia's family did not. The mother, see, the family was going through a very hard time. The father was drinking a lot, and he incurred debts, and he had to sell off some of his property. There's a lot of tension in the family, and so on. And now, after little Jacinta got out with the message, then Lucia's mother confronted her, is this true? Did you see a beautiful? And she said, yes. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. You're making up a story. You're going to cause trouble for us. She said, I'm going to take you to the priest. Well, when she took him to the priest, she took her little daughter to the priest, and the priest said, well, I don't think she saw the Blessed Mother, but let her go back there. Because the mother was saying maybe she shouldn't go, and, but she did, she continued to go back there. But she was so persecuted, not only by her family, but even by people in the town. Oh, there's the person who saw the Blessed Mother. Maybe she's above your house over there, They were mocking her. But she accepted this, and they went back the next month. Our Lady had asked them for 2 things. Come back on the 13th of every month and pray the rosary every day. The pray the rosary every day was in every one of the 6 apparitions in the cova. Now, the second month, June 13th, by the way, Feast of St. Anthony, it's a big feast over there in Portugal. As you know, St. Anthony was born in Portugal. He was born in Lisbon, but the Italians adopted him. That's why he's Anthony of Padua and not Anthony of Lisbon. And there's a big fight between them. When Pope John XXIII went there, Pope John Paul went there, he said to the Portuguese, St. Anthony is not St. Anthony of Padua. Well, they all cheered because they've been saying that for hundreds of years, And then he said, St. Anthony is not St. Anthony of Lisbon. Silence. And then he said, St. Anthony is St. Anthony of the whole world. Then they all cheered, Well, the second apparition occurred on the Feast of St. Anthony, and there was about 50 people there, and the children spoke to Our Lady, and Our Lady asked, "Are you suffering much?" And Lucia said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I will be with you. I will never leave you. I will be your consolation." And then Lucia brought up the question of heaven again. She said, "Are we going to go to heaven?" Our Lady said, "I'm going to take Jacinta and Francisco soon, but you must stay a little bit longer." She died at the age of 97. "You must stay a little bit longer to make known my message and spread devotion to my Immaculate Heart." And that's when she told them, God is intending to establish devotion to my Immaculate Heart as a means of saving the world, saving souls. So she again told them to pray the rosary every day. And Lucia said to her, there are two people want to know two things. They want to know who you are, and they want a sign that you are really appearing here. She said, "In October, I will tell you who I am, and I will give you a sign so that all the people can believe." Okay, let me move on to the July apparition. July forms the most important apparition as far as the message. Okay, you heard of the third secret of Fatima? Okay, it all comes from the July apparition. See, it's one apparition, but people have broken it into three parts. Okay, the first part was that Our Lady allowed the children to see a vision of hell. Now you might say, why would Our Lady allow these little ones? Not to scare them, and not to frighten them that they may go there, because she had already told them they're going to go to heaven, but to tell us hell is real. See, little Jacinta said, "I wish everybody had seen that vision, then nobody would ever go there. They would know how terrible hell is." See, and I think through these little children, Our Lady wanted us to be reminded hell is real. We don't like to talk about it, we don't like to think about it, but most important, let's make sure we don't go there. And that's why little Jacinta, she was the most affected. They did studies on some of the photographs of when you take the three children together and so on. The photograph taken right after that apparition, the children were so disheveled, and you could see they had gone through some kind of experience that really shook them, That was the first secret. And Our Lady said, "You have seen hell where poor sinners go, and it is to prevent this that God is establishing devotion to my Immaculate Heart." Then the second part of the secret, she goes right on, and she says, the war will end, soon. And the soldiers will come back. But if people do not heed my message, a more terrible war will begin. She even indicated who the Pope would be. She named him, Pius XI. He wasn't Pope yet. And she said, "And if you see a night lit up by an unknown light, know that that is a sign that God will punish the world." That happened on the night of January 25th, 26th, 1938. Okay? And that night, they didn't know what to call it. They called it an aurora borealis. That was green and red and in the sky. I wasn't alive at the time, but I remember talking to a former provincial I had. He was a young boy at the time. He said it was eerie. He said, "I remember that." And Sister Lucia said, "That's the sign." And shortly after that, Hitler moved his troops into Czechoslovakia, and the war began. Okay? Now, that was the second thing she predicted. But then she predicted an evil will begin in Russia that will spread its errors around the world, causing wars. We had Korea, Vietnam, and so on, Cuba, causing wars, causing famine. Remember Stalin starving the Ukrainians, millions of Ukrainians to death by starvation. Persecution of the church. The Holy Father will have much to suffer, and many nations will be annihilated. In other words, they got drawn up into the Soviet Union, lost their freedom and independence. See? And so she said, in order to prevent this, I will come back and I will ask for two things. The first thing she mentioned was, I will ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart by the Holy Father. And the second thing I will ask for is what she called the communion of reparation, which we call the 5 First Saturdays devotion. I'll explain that a little bit later. Okay, she did come back in 1925 to ask for the 5 First Saturdays devotion. Okay, I'll explain that a little bit later on. And then she came back in 1929 and asked for the consecration. The Pope at the time was Pius XI. Why he didn't do it, we don't know. But he didn't make the consecration. He had 8 years or 9 years to do it. He didn't do it, okay? Later on, Pope Pius XII, who was the next pope, in 1942, when they were celebrating the 25th anniversary of Fatima, the bishops in Fatima were celebrating, and they sent an urgent appeal to the Pope to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary so as to prevent the spread of communism. Okay, that was the request they had. But something interesting had happened. In addition to the request from Our Blessed Lady through Sister Lucia for the consecration of just Russia, there was another mystic living in Portugal at the time. Her name was Alexandrina de Costa. If you ever go to Portugal and you visit Fatima, you must go see where Alexandrina was. There was a cross in the ground there. It was, the dirt there is very, very light dirt. There was a cross of dark dirt that had been there for 100 years. And Alexandrina became a victim soul. She suffered an injury running away from this guy who was trying to attack her. And she did escape him, but she got injured and she became paralyzed. And she would lie in bed for about 10 years, and then she started having visions. Even the devil would come and attack her. The only time she ever got out of bed was on Fridays to suffer the Passion. For about 4 years that went on. But our Lord appeared to her and told her that if the Pope, Pius XII, consecrates the world to the Immaculate Heart of my mother, and he didn't have to do that part with the bishops, just the Pope had to do it, I will shorten World War II by 2 years. And so you had two requests. And by the way, the bishops of Portugal knew both these saintly women. In fact, Alexandrina is now blessed. Okay, and so you have the request of Our Lady of Fatima to consecrate Russia. You have through Sister Lucia. You have the request of the Sacred Heart of Jesus through Alexandrina de Costa, another mystic, to consecrate the world. Okay, and so what happened? 1942, Pius XII, on October 31st, 1942, he attempted to make that consecration. I shouldn't say attempted. He did make the consecration. The consecration of the world took hold, okay, because he didn't need to do it with the bishops. And in doing that, historians point out, beginning in 1943, the Allies began to win victories they had never won before. It was a turning point in the war, right at that point, and that's right after the consecration. So the consecration of the world took hold. However, the consecration of Russia, the bishops told the Pope, just make a special reference to Russia. That'll cover it. But he had to do it with all the bishops. And see, the war was going on. And so he couldn't contact all the bishops. Now, he didn't mention Russia by name, okay, for two reasons. Number one, Russia was our ally. And if he had condemned Russia, well, then people would have said, well, why not Nazi Germany? They're just as bad. But remember, Our Lady didn't ask for Nazi Germany. She only asked for Russia. See? So that was one reason he didn't do it, didn't mention it. And the second reason is he would turn the whole Russian church against him. Like our country is evil. See? So he made this reference. He said that nation where your icons were venerated cannot be venerated now, but will be venerated again. That was the reference to Russia. Now, by the way, when Sister Lucia was asked to present these two requests from Our Lady for Russia, from the Sacred Heart for the world, at first she was a little bit reluctant. She went to pray before the Blessed Sacrament, and Jesus told her, do what the bishops told you to do. So she had no problem with the double consecration, the world and Russia, okay? And no problem with it not being named. See, people will say the reason it didn't take hold because it wasn't named. They say that about John Paul. That's another reason why Pius XII's consecration didn't work. It didn't work because he couldn't get enough bishops. And Sister Lucia told him that. You didn't have enough bishops, so the consecration of Russia did not take hold, okay? But that's very important because that's exactly the same way John Paul II did it. But he did have the bishops. And that's why his consecration took hold. That's the difference, okay? Now, so let me get back to the next apparition. In August, the third part, the third secret, okay. What did that consist in? It began with an angel holding a flaming sword, and he's ready to touch the earth, okay? The Blessed Mother put her hand out, and there were breezes from her hand that prevented the flames from touching the earth, which would have meant if those flames had engulfed the earth, we would probably a nuclear war. The world would have been, annihilated. She prevented, I believe she prevented a world war for us, atomic war, see, at that time. Then the angel said, penance, penance, penance. Then the next thing they saw was like a procession of people coming through a burned out city, stepping even over dead bodies. Those represented all the cities of the last century, World War II especially, that were destroyed, and all the dead. And led by a pope, going up the mountain. There were bishops behind him, religious men and women, priests, lay people, huge crowd of them, going up a hill where a crucifix was, where Christ was, and there was blood coming from the wounds of Christ, and the angels were catching the blood in these great big basins. And all of a sudden, the Pope, as he's praying before the crucifix, gets shot, okay, and he dies. And all these other martyrs these were all the martyrs of the 20th century that Pope John Paul was beatifying. Remember all the ones he beatified? The martyrs in Mexico, 125 priests, the martyrs in Spain, the martyrs all over the world, in China and so on. Those were all those people. And that's why he used to say, we are going to have a new springtime in the church because of the blood of the martyrs of the last century. Okay? And so that Pope was shot. Now, let me get back to, I'm going to hold off of that last apparition. I'm going to jump ahead, okay? Now, let me explain what happened in terms of that request for the 5 first Saturdays, okay? Remember, Our Lady said, to prevent the spread of communism, I will ask for the 5 first Saturdays, or communion of devotion. Okay, communion of reparation, I'm sorry. So she came in 1925. She appeared to Sister Lucia, who was then a postulant with the Dorothean sisters of St. Dorothy. And she appeared in her little bedroom, but she appeared with the Christ child. He was on a little cloud. He was a little boy, so he was on this little cloud. And Mary's heart was surrounded by a crown of thorns. And these thorns were piercing the heart of Our Lady. And the Christ child said to Sister Lucia, you see the heart of your mother, pierced by thorns put there by evil men. Who will take these thorns out of your mother's heart? Then Mary spoke to her and said to her, Sister Lucia, at least you do it for me. And then tell anyone who on 5 first Saturdays, consecutive 5 first Saturdays, will go to confession, receive Holy Communion, offer a rosary, and then spend 15 more minutes quietly meditating on the mysteries. All of these 4 things to do with the intention of making reparation for the offenses against my Immaculate Heart. That's the devotion of the 5 first Saturdays, okay? So, confession. By the way, I was with the sister who was in charge of the canonization for little Jacinta and Francisco. She said that the Vatican has allowed now, you can go any day of the month and apply it to that first Saturday of that month. Confession. You must go to communion, though, on that day. Now, if you don't have any masses with, let's say Saturday morning masses, either get a deacon to do a communion service, or go to another parish that has Saturday Mass, or offer your Saturday night communion, but go to Mass on Sunday for Sunday. Okay? You can do it that way. All right? Then say a rosary. Okay? All with the idea of making reparation to her Immaculate Heart, taking those thorns out of the heart of Our Lady. And finally, spend 15 more minutes in personal prayer with her, meditating on some of the other mysteries. Normally on Saturday, we say the joyful mysteries. So use either the luminous mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, the glorious mysteries, any number of them for 15 minutes. See, I think Our Lady is teaching us to pray. I call it in my book, at the end I have a whole appendix. I talk about the historical events in the regular part of the book. At the end, I've got an appendix. It's so important, this devotion, because Sister Lucia said this is the most neglected part of the message of Fatima. This is why the conversions are taking forever, because not enough people are doing that devotion. And that's why I'm trying to encourage you. I encourage you, all of you, if you're not doing the 5 First Saturday, please do it. The conversion of the world needs it. If we're going to do it rapidly, conversion is taking place. It's taking place slowly. But when Our Lady said, when enough people do it, then my triumph will come. Like those people who were at Pope Benedict's Mass there in Fatima. Mary, thank you for what you are doing for our nation. The conversion beginning there, but now we need it over here, don't we? I think very important. I think Mary holds the key to what's happening. Because what we're suffering now, I believe our secularism is nothing but the American form of communism. They're just never going to give it that name, because Americans will never tolerate the name communism. But that's what we've got. Attacking life, attacking the family, now attacking our religious freedom, and it's going to be a real major persecution of the church if we don't turn this around. And it's prayer and reparation, that can do it. These are the things Our Lady said will have the power to convert the world, okay? And she's asking us as her loyal sons and daughters to do this. Now, what happened then, the last part, I mentioned the third secret, okay? When Sister Lucia, when the bishops wanted to canonize Francisco and Jacinta, they died long before. They died within 2 years or so after the apparitions. When they wanted to canonize Jacinta and Francisco, the only one they could go to get information was Lucia. So she began to write her memoirs. Now, our Lord told her, and the Blessed Mother said, keep the secrets of July. Do not mention them. So she wrote one memoir. She wrote a second, a third. When it came to the fourth memoir, she said, I can't tell them any more about the Francisco, unless I talk about the July apparition for the 3 secrets. They said, all right, mention the first 2. So she wrote about the first 2, about the vision of hell and the prediction of Russia, communism spreading around the world, and the ending of World War II. And the beginning of World War II with that sign when you see the night lit up by the unknown light. Okay? So that happened. Okay? Now, what about the third part? Our Lord said, keep that secret. Now, she wrote that fourth memoir around 1941. 1944, she got very sick. And the Bishop of Fatima went to see her. He said, you may die, and there's a part of the secret you haven't told us. So she said, all right, I will write it out. She wrote it on one sheet of paper, one side and the back side. That's all it was, one sheet of paper. And she wrote it all out. She put it in an envelope. On her own, not from the Blessed Mother, she wrote 1960 out on the outside. She said, either open it when I die or 1960. Okay? The Bishop of Fatima held it for a number of years, till around 1957, and he finally sent it to unopened. He never opened it, although Sister Lucia said he could look at it, but he never did. He sent it to the Vatican. Now, the Pope at the time, 1960, was Pope John XXIII. About 3 months before 1960, he decided, because there was so much hype about 1960, he decided to take a look at the message. Now, the reason, as I told you, 1960 was Sister Lucia figured by then everybody's going to know everything in this dream. This not dream, this vision, the Pope getting shot, and so on. Well, Pope John XXIII, around October of 1959, he looks at it, and I guess he said, who's this Pope that gets shot? I don't know who that is, So he said, we better send it back, put it back in the archives. This is not the time. Now, unfortunately, a little confusion here. The Vatican said, we're not going to release the third secret. And then somebody added, we may never release it. Well, that sent people ballistic. People said the Vatican is hiding something from us, a nuclear war. I even heard the devil's going to take over the church. Jesus said he can't do it. The gates of hell can't prevail. See, all kind of hype started over that. And that's where we got a lot of these things. The Pope is hiding this and not wanting to tell us. No, that's not right, okay? If the Pope had put that out, that a pope was going to get shot, we got a lot of loose cannons out there, right? Somebody would have taken a pot shot at it. Well, I'm the one that's got to do that, right? We got a lot. Do you realize the Pope, a man of peace, is the most guarded person in the world when he travels? Do you realize that? No one has the security that the Pope has when he visits. And here he is, a man of peace, right? So if the Pope had put that word out that a Pope was going to get shot, any, crackpot could have taken a shot at the Pope. Now, who was the next Pope? Paul VI. He looked at it and he said, who's this Pope? They get shot. Send it back. Okay? All right. John Paul I did not live long enough, 1 month. John Paul II. Now, he didn't look at it in the beginning. No, he had his entanglement, right, with communism in his own homeland. Remember that city they were building, the communists were building, Nova Huta? They wouldn't allow a church to be built there. He marched the people in there. The soldiers had their guns leveled at the Pope, but he was unafraid. And they built a church. He said the people have a right to a church in their city. He stood up to them. And when he became Pope, you remember, he was May 13th, 1981, Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. He was in the St. Peter's Square, the piazza, and he leaned down to bless a statue of the Blessed Mother. And that's why when the guy fired the gun, he was slightly off balance, the Pope, from where the guy thought he would be, when he was aiming, because he moved the last moment. That bullet went through the Holy Father, missed every vital organ by fractions of an inch. And that's why the Pope said later on, it's not so much that Mary saved me from my life, she gave me back my life. He lost 4.5 pints of blood in the hospital. They thought they were going to lose him, He was taken to the Gemelli Hospital. And you remember his assassin was a man named Ali Aga, Turkish guy. They could never prove, although the Holy Father had the deep feeling that it was the Russian secret police that hired him, but that could never be proven, okay? So but he went to see Ali Aga. Remember that the Pope went to see him? You know what Ali Aga said to him? How come you're still alive? He said, I'm an assassin. I don't miss. He said, and this is interesting, because it came from his assassin. Whose feast was it in your church that day? That's the one who saved you. Our Lady Fatima. Now, remember, when he was in the hospital, he was in for about 3 weeks, okay? They saved his life. He went back to the Vatican, and then they had to rush him back to the Gemelli Hospital again. When he was there the second time, it began to dawn on him. May 13th, the assassination attempt. May 13th, Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. He said, bring me the third secret. When he read it, he instantly recognized, that's me, the Pope who got shot. And I should have died, but Our Lady, gave me back my life. That's the way he put it. And so he made the intention, I'm going to make the consecration. Exactly a year later, May 13th, 1982, he went to Fatima. He consecrated. He made the consecration. He had depended on people in the Vatican to send out the notices to all the bishops. They never sent them out on time. He was really upset with that. So he took things into his own hands. 1983, on December the 8th, he sent out invitations to all the bishops of the Catholic Church, even invited the bishops in Russia. Five or seven of them joined in that consecration, the Russian Orthodox bishops. Okay, and so he sent that out to all the bishops on December the 8th, 1983. He made the consecration on March 25th, 1984. Okay, in St. Peter's Square, he had the statue brought over from Fatima, which in the crown, that's where the bullet that went through him is in that crown. See? So he made the consecration. There were 800 bishops right there, but there were almost 3,000 bishops responded to him and said, we will make the consecration in our diocese. So he had almost all the bishops, okay, doing it with him. So he made it that day, and Sister Lucia said that heaven accepted it. Okay, and they said, well, how will we know? She said, look to the east. Now, I'll give you a few statistics that you'll find very interesting. He made that consecration, as I say, on March the 25th, 1984. Now, here's an interesting little thing I learned after I wrote the book. How many of you remember when Pope Leo the 13th had a vision one day? It was after his Mass, and he had like a vision toward the tabernacle. He saw Christ, he saw St. Michael, and he saw the devil. And the devil was saying to Jesus, I can destroy your church. I just need more time and more power over my people. And Jesus said to him, how much time do you need? He said, 100 years. He said, you have 100 years, and you have unlimited power over your people. Guess what year that was? 1884. Guess what year the Pope made the consecration, which broke the power of communism? 1984. Exactly 100 years later. Because I believe that communism was the main tool of Satan, and still is. That's why we're affected by it here. See? And what we're going through now, this struggle for our freedom now, we even see freedom. We've seen life, we've seen the family under attack. Christian culture, that John Paul said, the whole Christian culture is at stake. If we lose this battle in America, we are going to lose the basis. We're going to, you know what, we're going to be in a Muslim state. That's what I think we're heading toward. You know, they don't give you your rights. Look at that one guy who became a Catholic, remember, in Afghanistan? The whole country was looking for him. Remember that? The Pope had to plead to let him out of Afghanistan. That's not freedom. There's no respect for women in Islam, radical Islam. And this is our struggle. And you know, isn't it interesting that the Blessed Mother appeared in the only place in all of Portugal with a Muslim name? Remember, the Muslims controlled Portugal for many, many years, about 300 years. And finally, a Catholic prince, he told the king, we have to drive them out of our nation. We have to take our nation back. He was afraid to do it, but then the prince said, well, then I'll die doing it. And the king was so encouraged that he fought 5 sheiks. Each sheik had an army. He defeated them one after the other and drove the Muslims out. And when the last Muslim group was leaving Portugal, a princess stayed behind. Her name was Fatima. She was very beautiful. She married a Christian prince. He changed her name to Orema. She became a Christian. She died a year later. He missed her so much, the people loved her so much, that he became a Cistercian monk. And then he was sent to a little small monastery, because they had a huge monastery there for 1,000 monks. They were the Cistercians, like the Order of St. Bernard, And there was this small little house of prayer. And that monk, whose wife had died, was stationed there, and he asked for permission to bring her remains there and bury her near the monastery, this little monastery. And that's Fatima. That's how it got the name. And Bishop Sheen used to say, you've got to believe that the Blessed Mother did not come down out of heaven to the only place in all of Portugal with a Muslim name just to convert Russia. He said, if we don't have the conversions of hundreds of millions of Muslims, there'll never be world peace. He said that in 1952. Do you think he was right? I think if you look at the world, yes. Look at the tension in the world now. And he predicted that in 1952. And so that's why Our Lady came with the answer. He said that Our Lady chose to come there as a sign of her gratitude to the Muslim people. Do you know they believe in the Immaculate Conception? They believe in the virgin birth. The only problem is they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. They believe he's only a prophet, see? But Bishop Sheen felt that the Muslim, when the statue of Our Lady of Fatima comes into Muslim countries, the Christians can't get into churches. I was in Kazan in Russia when Pope John Paul sent the icon that he had in his room in the Vatican. He had this Russian icon that had been smuggled out when the communists took over in Russia. See? And the Blue Army got it. They spent millions of dollars to get it. But they kept it in their place in Fatima. They have a Domus Pacis, it's a hotel there, and they had a Russian chapel. And that icon was there for 30 years. Then they sent it to Pope John Paul II because he wanted to go to Russia and he would take the icon with him, see? And also for safekeeping there, the Vatican. Well, the Pope never got there, but he sent the icon back. And I was in the first international group that went to venerate that icon. And there were half the people venerating the icon were Muslims. That's the love they have for her. And that's why this city of 1 million people, there's no racial tension between the Muslims and Christians. It's Our Lady, who they all love her. See? So Mary is the key to the peace of the world. Huh? Now, Lucia said that the third secret was revealed, and was revealed at the Beatification Mass in the year 2000, on May 13th, when Pope John Paul was saying Mass there. He had Cardinal Sudano read it. And a copy of that appeared inside the Vatican supplement. You know, you can see the actual facsimile. You see the actual thing that Lucia wrote. In fact, Cardinal Bertoni took it. He went to see her. He said to her, "Is this what you wrote?" She felt that. She said, "This is what I wrote. This one page." Now, these people who tell you there's documents being hidden, nobody's ever seen it. It's all fabricated on the idea that this is a possibility, this is, a hypothesis. But you can't make a hypothesis become reality. It doesn't happen like that. Supposing I had a hypothesis, we got elephants in Africa, so I believe that there are red and yellow and green elephants floating around over Africa. Now, I believe that, so you have to take that as a reality, because I believe that. See? Does that make it a reality? You say, "Father, you're out of your mind," right? But that's what's happened. All these things are built on hypotheses. Trying to say the Pope didn't make the consecration, and saying, well, Sister Lucia said heaven accepted it. Oh, she couldn't speak the truth. You think a young girl who was threatened to be boiled in oil, if she didn't reveal the secrets, and she didn't. Remember, I didn't get into the August apparition. They were abducted by the governor there, who was a Mason, and he had to get the message out of them, and he threatened to boil each of them in oil. They were willing to die rather than go against what Our Lady said to keep the secret. You think she's going to stand there and say, "No, that's okay, we're faking it." She would never do that. She was very upset from people who said the secret wasn't all done or the consecration wasn't made. Now, I told you I would give you some statistics. The consecration was made on March 25th, 1984. In 1985, Gorbachev came to power, the Soviet Union. He brought what he called Glasnost and the Perestroika, a new approach. And in 1985, since 1985 to 2011, late last year I got these statistics, there has been an increase in churches in Russia of 350%. How much have we increased in America in number of churches? Or maybe I should say decreased, right? We're closing churches, we're amalgamating them. 350% increase. The number of monasteries in 1991, which was the year Gorbachev declared the Soviet Union over, took down the Soviet flag over the Kremlin and put up the Russian flag as a free country. In that year, I did it, by the way, on Christmas Day. In that year, there were 117 monasteries in Russia. There now are 800 monasteries filled. How many of our religious houses are filled with vocations? How many have we increased? No. See, a conversion is happening there. See? And it will affect the world. See, Bishop Sheen used to say, we in the West have Christ, but we have no cross, no sacrifice, no discipline. Our Christ without the cross, he says, can't save anybody. The Russians, communists, they had the cross. They had suffering, they had dedication to a cause, they had discipline, but they had no Christ. He said, will they find Christ because they already have the cross before we find the cross because we already had Christ? They're finding Christ. It's happening. Do you know that they have a celebration, national celebration, to celebrate the coming of Christianity to Russia? Imagine if we asked for a national celebration of the coming of Christianity to America. You know what we get as a response, huh? I would hate to say it. Yeah? This is why, the great signs, there are great things happening. Do you know that before the communists took over in Russia, Russia was the most dedicated country in the world to the Blessed Mother? The reason why the Catholic Church could not have been controlled as they controlled the Russian Church, because the Russian Church was kind of coexistent with the country. Once you control the country, you control the whole church. The Catholic Church is international. See, that's why Stalin knew. See, Stalin actually had a plan to destroy the Catholic Church. In 1930, I was telling some people at dinner tonight, he said the way, he was a seminarian, you know, and he read Darwin, and he came to the conclusion God didn't exist, and he got thrown out of the seminary for reading pornography. First thing he did as the premier of Russia, he went back to that seminary, executed all the priests and all the seminarians. They executed an estimated 240,000 bishops, priests, and religious men and women. That's how methodical the war on religion was in Russia. And they survived. 75 years directly under communist dictatorship. They used to have the picture of Stalin in their house, you know, during the day. Then at night they flip it around and Blessed Mother was on the other side. They kept their faith. What an example. They've suffered. And I believe we're going to feel the effect of their suffering. Because in the mystical body, when one member is healthy, all the members share in that health. And we need the power of their conversions to bring about. But Our Lady said, it will happen if we do what she said. And the main thing I really encourage you to is to, maybe you can get a copy of this at the bookstore. They think they're going to get copies of this. But to read, to understand what the message of the 5 First Saturdays is. Do your rosary every day, because that's all they said. Offer little sacrifices for the conversion of sinners, and make the 5 First Saturdays devotion. That's the key. See, all this attention on whether the Pope made the consecration, there's no reference to whether we're doing the 5 Saturdays. And remember I told you, the Blessed Mother did not ask for just one thing, not just the consecration. She asked for the 5 First Saturdays devotion. That's not being done. The more we do it, when she said, when enough people are doing it, my victory will come. So that's why I encourage you, spread this message. Like the Pope said, he said, learn the message of Fatima, live the message of Fatima, and spread the message of Fatima. It's the key, I believe, I'm absolutely convinced, the key to what's going on in the world right now. Even in our country, you know, because this is the overwhelming victory of Mary. You know, she's going to crush the head of the serpent, you know, and that's, as I see it, his tool was communism. See? So I don't know if you have any questions. I'd like to try to take any questions that you might have. You know. Oh, by the way, as I said, Pope Benedict believes very strongly in this message. He hopes that, he made the statement, we can hope that by 2017, which is a 100-year anniversary, we might see the triumph of Mary. He said, I'm not making a prophecy, but I'm expressing a hope. Wouldn't that be great? That we could see the triumph of Our Lady. But your rosary, remember Padre Pio said, is there any prayer more beautiful than the rosary, than the prayer she herself taught us? Always pray. Pray it every day. You'll be surprised what it'll do for your life, you know, and what it'll do for the world, conversion. Remember she said at Fatima, she said the rosary is powerful enough to stop wars, bring world peace, and convert sinners. And that's her big thing, the conversion of sinners, because souls are being lost. That's why she came to plead for our prayers. And as she said, many souls are lost from God. There's no one to pray and offer sacrifices for them. That's part of our mission. I was reading a beautiful quote of the little flower. She said, we must all become apostles working with Christ for the salvation of souls. It's a great part of the mission we have as Catholics.